many times we hear criticisms of this law, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Oftentimes we hear that from our opponents that there needs to be a change or that there's a need to amend the law because of problems. Oftentimes this discussion loses sight of the real issue. The real issue of what the Michigan Medical Marijuana intent or its purpose was intended for, and that was for the protection of patients. This is the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act we speak of every week, and it is about patients. This law was written for patients. The law was intended to provide a registry card that was supposed to stand for something to protect patients against arrest, prosecution, and any penalty. To not be asked, why do you need medical marijuana, or not to be spoken to in a way where it's stated that you don't look like a medical marijuana patient. There's an expectation of what the cards were supposed to stand for. The people that got involved with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, I remember advising early on, I always suggested to them, well, the first thing that you have to do is you have to take a leap of faith that the government is going to, in fact, follow the law. That, in fact, the government is going to protect your privacy. And only then, if you're willing to accept those things, should you go forward. And many of the people wanted to, and they wanted to believe that the government would, in fact, implement the law, protect them from, protect their privacy from being leaked, and at a very minimum, provide them cards that they could utilize to protect themselves when they encounter law enforcement. There was also a belief that they would be able to present a defense to any charges involving marijuana. This is what was stated in the referendum. This is what was on the ballot in November of 2008, and it's the most clear of all the language. And as we sit here, and I just realized we're in our fourth calendar year since the act's been passed, and all of these expectations and all of these beliefs and all of these, reading of the law, just I'm talking about the simple things. We aren't even into transfers or into anything that could be considered, mildly complex, and it has been an utter failure on the part of the government. And I mention that because a lot of times there is a criticism from the community, and albeit there's always going to be some bad apples anywhere, and it exists in all kinds of behavior, and this is a new law. But as we return to the real focus of what this law was intended, it was for the purpose of protecting patients. And oftentimes we lose sight of this. And I mention this because today, as often the case, you get a call in my office where we hear that when law enforcement went into a caregiver's home, they state that you have to have your card to be a caregiver. You have to have your physical card, and when they presented their paperwork and then they presented their cash check, verification that the state had received it, and counting the calendar days since it had been received, and verifying, as the law states, that the documentation, the application shall be deemed a valid registry card, and told, no, that doesn't work. Law enforcement, we're here, we're going to take your plans, and we're going to demand that you have your card. And the trouble is that the state has never, or in our fourth year, never been able to get the cards out on time. Very, very distressing. Yet when we talk about problems, we talk about needing to fix things, the question is, are these the things that are being attempted to be fixed? Is the patient really being thought of here in the analysis of problems? The other thing that is the most distressing is that when we encounter law enforcement, when patients, caregivers encounter law enforcement, we find in court that there's this unbelievable concept that people are just amazed by when they hear that the attorneys are not able to present a medical marijuana defense in the case, that for some reason it becomes irrelevant because there was a technical violation of the act. And as we sit here 4 years into it, I understand we've had a law on the books for over 80 years. We have a deeply entrenched fabric of our society that has been viewing cannabis in a very specific way. And a law passes, and it's going to be very difficult to change the way everybody thinks. But we know that the majority of voters believed in, voted for, declared, as the law states, that marijuana is a medicine and it treats a number of different debilitating conditions. We know that the people who voted for it knew that, believed that, mandated it, and expected there to be a change in the way that people that didn't believe that looked at it. They believed that there would be some effort on the part not just to implement the law, but also at least at a minimum change the way that we look at it socially, and it comes from the education and discussion and learning and a real effort to understand the medical marijuana community and the caregiver community. And that's what's been missing. And all these things that I talk about as it relates to law enforcement and their attitudes about cannabis, and it's not all law enforcement because many of them have changed their views, and many of them have, spoken quite openly about their relatives who may be patients, and they believe that cannabis works. But there is a whole other group that is not honoring the law, and I believe much of the problem has not even come directly from them. It's the failure of the state to honor the law, to in fact educate or take some kind of efforts to change the way that they look at it. And the only reason that we're here 4 years into it and this hasn't happened is, the expectation of the state to spend money that's not there to do that. But the reason I say is because there's been an inability to have these cases heard before juries, that this is a people's law, that this is a law that when the issues of whether it's medical or not are going to be interpreted, it should not be exclusively interpreted by law enforcement, that it needs to have an opportunity to get to juries to be heard, and only when this takes place and only when juries have an opportunity to hear the cases and will begin to return verdicts of not guilty and acquittal after acquittal, this is what will force social change. This is what will force prosecutors and police agencies to look at the medical marijuana community differently, and instead of looking for ways to find them in violation, realize that that is not what the law was intended for, and to focus their intentions as in fact the intent of the law mandated. So until these things happen, I don't think it's fair to really say that there's problems with the act itself. And that's my rant, and I hope that we'll get a chance to discuss some of these things with our guest when he calls in. I want to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and do some patient testimonials. I see our anticipated guest, Barb Agro, is on the line. I'm glad you got the message, Barb, and you're able to get through to us. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and get right into it. We'll be right back.